This is Jesus speaking. Well, not me, but you know what I mean. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Amen. Now, as you probably know, I'm sure all of you know by now, that Jill and I come from Jersey, the Channel Islands, and but we've been living in Wales now for 7 years, is it, Jill? I think 7 years. And we love being in Wales. It's great. We love the valleys. We love the people. But there is just one aspect of living in Wales that I've had to learn to come to terms with personally, and I'll tell you what that is: sheep. Now, I probably don't need to tell you this, but you've got a lot of sheep in Wales. In Jersey, we don't have many sheep because we're only a tiny little island. We don't have the room for, because most of the pasture land is taken up by Jersey cows, of course, the world famous Jersey cow with the best milk in the world and all that kind of stuff. But sheep, not so much. But here, as soon as you go anywhere, even remotely rural, you turn around and you fall over a sheep. And I'll tell you about how this message came about. We were walking the dogs up at Fox Hunter, if anybody knows where that is, up at the edge of the Brecon Beacons. And we love going up there with the dogs, all the heather and all that. It's beautiful. And there are a lot of sheep. We have to be a bit careful because there are a lot of sheep just milling around. And we parked the car one sunny day. Remember those sunny days, if anybody remembered what they were like? And because it was quite warm, I had the window down. And we stopped the car park. I looked out and there was a sheep looking in the window at me, just with that stupid expression on its face, that they were munching away. And it kind of set a train of thought in my head that led to this message. I thought, we're referred to as sheep a lot in the Bible. In fact, when I looked into it, I discovered that we were actually referred to as sheep more than anything else. Even David, of course, who was, a shepherd himself, he used the analogy over and over again. There's a couple of examples in Psalm 100 verse 3. He said, "We are God's people and the sheep of his pasture." In Psalm 77:2, he wrote, "God, you lead your people like a flock." And in Psalm 79:13, "We, your people and the sheep of your pasture, will give you thanks forever." And of course, most famously in Psalm 23, that most popular of Psalms, he said, "The Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want." So, of course, if he says the Lord is our shepherd, then that means that we are sheep. And throughout the Bible, we see that same kind of parallel drawn between man and sheep. One of my very favourites actually is in Isaiah 40 verse 11, where it says that God tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that are with young. And you could go on and on and on throughout the Bible, just giving scriptures that infer that we are, for some reason, similar to sheep. There's something very comforting in that thought that the Lord is our shepherd, isn't there? And I think that's the reason why Psalm 23 is used more often than not during funerals. When you're facing the loss of a loved one, and you're sad and you're hurting and you're confused and you just don't know if you're going to get over this, and you hear the words, "The Lord is my shepherd," and it just speaks to something deep inside of us. You see, God has placed in our hearts, in the hearts of all of us actually, the understanding that we really, really, really need a shepherd. We need someone to keep us safe. We need someone to guide us when we're confused. In fact, we need someone to guide us through this minefield called life. So why sheep particularly? Why are we referred to as sheep so often? You'll be pleased to know I looked into it. I looked into all the attributes of a sheep. That's how sad I am. To discover why the Bible compares sheep to us, or us to them. So, yes, I have been looking and reading all about sheep, so you don't have to. There's no need to thank me. First of all, sheep are pretty stupid. You'll never see a performing sheep. You might see performing dogs, or, we were in Florida some years ago, we saw the animal show where they were performing cats and dogs and birds and I don't know what else. They were very clever, but you can't really teach a sheep anything. They can't really be taught. Secondly, sheep are rather dirty and quite wayward. When you look at the Christmas cards, you see those little cotton ball things of representations of sheep on them, and they all look all nice and fluffy and lovely. But that really isn't a sheep. That's not what they're like at all. For one thing, they smell really bad. And it's impossible for them to keep themselves clean. They're also prone to wander. They're short-sighted. They can't see any more than about 15 yards in front of them. So they don't really know where they're going. And it doesn't matter how many times you round them up, they'll just wander off again. Does that sound familiar? They're also, on top of all that, they're also prone to all kinds of diseases. They get ill really, really easily. They pick things up really quickly. And on top of all that, sheep are easily frightened and easily confused. And it's not unknown for sheep in certain parts of the world to get scared over something and to just run in a flock and just fall off the top or over a cliff and just follow each other to their death. I remember reading a news article not long after we moved to Wales about the sheep somewhere in Wales where they had discovered this discarded bag of marijuana in the field. And I don't know if people had been chased by police or something, and they tossed the bag out. And the sheep had discovered that they were the whole field full of stoned sheep wandering around. I thought, only in Wales, only in Wales for that. So what I've just told you, these are the animals that we are most compared to in the Bible. It's like God is saying to us, you see those smelly, defenseless, easily scared sheep down there? Yes, Lord. But that's you, that is. Well, thanks. Now, of course, he doesn't make that comparison just to put us down, but he makes that comparison to help us to realize that we really need a shepherd. So when we read scriptures like Isaiah 53 verse 6, where it says, "We all like sheep have gone astray, and each of us has turned to his own way." Or Mark 9:36, where it says, "When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd." Texts like this should remind us that we have this inborn need for a shepherd. Now, not only do we need a shepherd, but there is only one who is qualified to be that shepherd. There's only one who is capable of not only being a shepherd, but being the good shepherd. And as Jesus said in verse 12 of what we read at the beginning, the hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. You see, Jesus isn't the hired hand. He's not some stranger who's just been imported in to care for the sheep for a day or two. No, Jesus knows us. You see, the relationship between sheep and shepherds were different in Israel than they were in other parts of the world. For example, in Britain, sheep are kept mostly for killing and eating. But in Israel, most sheep are kept for their wool or for their milk. So in the land of the Bible, the sheep were often with a shepherd for many years. In fact, sometimes he would deliver the lamb himself, and that lamb would be with him throughout their entire lives. He knew them. The shepherds in Israel knew their sheep and even gave them names. He would name them individually. He knew them all by name. And of course, when David wrote that psalm, the people who he wrote it for would know better perhaps than we do. They would understand because they come from shepherding folk. They come from an agricultural background, whereas we don't so much. But we understood that. They would have understood that better than we do. That the Good Shepherd knew them intimately. He knew their names. He knew all about them. He knew all their faults and their failings. And you see, the same applies to Jesus. He has watched every man and woman since the beginning of the world. He knows everything about us. Jesus knows everything that there is to know about you and your life situation. In fact, it says somewhere in the Bible, when God says in the Bible, doesn't it, that when you were still in your mother's womb, I knew you. Just think about that for a second. Just let that sink in. There isn't a single motivation, there isn't a single act or word that has escaped your being, that has escaped the Lord's undivided attention. He knows it all and he sees it all. As Hebrews 4:13 puts it, all things are naked and open to the eyes of God. Does anybody know Max Lucado? Well, not personally, but do you know he was a writer? Anybody heard of Max Lucado? Yeah? Now, Max Lucado, he's very good at giving illustrations for things. He tells great stories. And he wrote, some years ago, he wrote a piece about the difference between cowboys and cows and shepherds and their sheep. And I'm going to read what he wrote. Behold the hero of the American West, the cowboy. Behold the hero of the Bible, the shepherd. On the surface, he appears similar to the cowboy. He too is rugged. He sleeps where the jackals howl and works where the wolves prowl. Never off duty, always alert. Like the cowboy, he makes his roof the stars and the pasture his home. But that is where the similarities end. You see, the shepherd loves his sheep. It's not that the cowboy doesn't appreciate the cow. It's just that he doesn't know the animal. He doesn't even want to. Have you ever seen a picture of a cowboy hugging a cow? Have you ever seen a shepherd with his arms around the sheep? Sure. Why the difference? Simple. The cowboy leads the cow to slaughter. The shepherd leads the sheep to be shorn. The cowboy wants the meat of the cow. The shepherd wants the wool of the sheep. And so they treat the animal differently. The cowboy drives the cattle. The shepherd leads the sheep. A herd of cattle has 12 cowboys. A flock has one shepherd. The cowboy wrestles, brands, herds, and ropes. The shepherd leads, guides, feeds, and anoints. The cowboy knows the names of the trail hands. The shepherd knows the names of the sheep. The cowboy hoops and hollers at the cows. The shepherd calls each sheep by name. And he finishes by saying this: aren't we glad Christ didn't call himself the good cowboy? See, I hope you're getting the picture that what I'm trying to bring across here. Jesus is the good shepherd because he knows us. Not only does he know us, but we also recognize him when he calls. In fact, this is how shepherds would prove ownership in Jesus' day. They didn't brand or mark the sheep. Each shepherd had his own distinctive call, and the sheep would only respond to that call. Some time ago, I read a story about from the days of World War I, when a group of Turkish soldiers came to one of the hills near Jerusalem. I didn't know there were Turkish soldiers in Jerusalem in World War I, but apparently there was. And they stole a large number of sheep. The shepherd had been asleep at the time, and when he woke up and he realized what had happened, he ran up onto the highest hill, and he looked down and saw his sheep a few hills away be carried away by these soldiers. And the situation was pretty hopeless because he was one guy, and these guys were all with rifles and machine guns. There's very little he could do. But he knew there was one thing that he could do. He stood on the hill, he put his hand to his mouth, and he gave that unique call that he called his sheep. And when they heard that, they stopped, they turned round, ignored the soldiers, and ran back to him. You see, they'd had enough of a relationship with him over the years to know his voice. And you see, like sheep, we all know Jesus' voice. In my own life, I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I was 14 years old when I became a Christian. And there was a time when in my first marriage, my first wife left me. I was left with two teenage girls to look after, and for a while I went away from God. I went further and further away from Him. It's too long a story to tell you, but it came to that stage where the wolves were circling. I was so far from God that everything was closing in. And then I heard the shepherd's call. I remember I was in a club on New Year's Eve. I might have told some of you this before, actually. I was in a club on New Year's Eve with friends of mine, and I had a pint in my hand. I don't even really like alcohol that much. I don't mind, I've got nothing against alcohol as such, but I don't really drink much myself. But I was standing there on New Year's Eve. I paid a fortune to get into this club because it was New Year's Eve, and it was a kind of singles bar, actually. That's what it was. And all of a sudden, I just thought, I don't know what I'm doing here. This is ridiculous. I'm not happy in my life. And I remember just putting my drink down like that and walking out the club without saying anything to anybody, or left my friends all that behind, and walking through the town, St Helier in Jersey, the main town in Jersey, and walking back to my little flat where I lived at the time. And as I remember it, because it was New Year's Eve, all the church bells were going, because it was like midnight. And I was walking through the streets on my own. I got to my room, and I sat down kneeled down by the side of my bed and said, Lord, I'm coming back to you. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know where I'm going to go. Your word says that you'll take me back. As if I was you, I wouldn't take me back, because I felt wretched. And yet I'd heard the shepherd's call, and he called me back. And eventually, of course, I went on, and God allowed me to marry this wonderful woman over there, and restored everything that had been lost over the years. Did I deserve it? Of course not. But He gave it to me anyway. I'd heard the shepherd's call. Some time ago, a couple of years ago, Jill and I were watching this documentary on BBC Wales. Had Kate Humble was presenting it. And I believe she lives in Wales, I think, and she had a Welsh sheepdog called Meg, if I remember rightly. Don't know why I remember the name. But and the whole thing about this documentary was that as a breed, the Welsh sheepdog apparently was dying out. So she went around looking at different working dogs to see if she could find one that would be a mate for hers, so that they could have puppies, and then it would help bring the breed on. And she was looking into how they work and different things. And one of the people that she went to who had one of these dogs, he was a shepherd, and he worked for the Welsh Forestry Commission, or whatever it's called. And his job was to go into the forests and to find stray sheep. And the dog had been taught to corner a sheep against a tree, and he would go out. He's a big, huge guy, flat cap, big beard, and he came out, and he would bind the front and back legs of the sheep, pick it up, put it on his shoulder and carry it out to his Land Rover, and they would either return it if they knew who it belonged to, or put it in a new flock somewhere else. And it made me think at the time, you know what? Those sheep hadn't been shorn sometimes for years. They were really, really heavy. They were big because the weight of all that wool on them just weighed them down. And yet he was able to pick them up and carry them. All that wool added many pounds to their weight. And it made me think, it doesn't matter how heavy the burden it is that you carry. You might feel that you're burdened down with the weight of all your anxieties and worries and fears and responsibilities. Never mind how much life has placed on you. It's never too heavy for the Good Shepherd. He can put you on his shoulders and carry you to safety. You see, the Good Shepherd's shoulders are very broad. Psalm 23 says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." And I always loved that, even as a young boy, even before I was a Christian. Do you remember the days when they used to come into the schools and give you a little Gideon Bible? I don't know if some of you remember. I was given one, the little New Testament and the Psalms. And I used to read it every day, even though I wasn't a Christian. And that psalm, particularly where it says, he will lead you beside still waters, for some reason was always very comforting to me, although I didn't really understand it. I didn't really understand what it meant. But when I was originally preparing this sermon, I looked into it to see what it meant. And I discovered something which I still think is amazing. Apparently in those days, the shepherds, if they would obviously need to bring the sheep to water, but if it was like a raging river, it wasn't very safe because they had these little spindly legs. And they, as soon as they got into the water, it would whisk them away. They'd be downstream to their doom. So what he would do is he would build a little breakwater of stones, like an L-shaped breakwater, and that would help them so they could go down safely to drink. And that apparently is what has been witnessed by, or he will lead you by still waters. And again, of course, the people who this was originally written for would have known that. They would have understood that, what he meant. You see, even when the waters rage, he can keep you safe. And now here's the thing. You might think that, you could hardly hold on any longer. The water's raging around you and the weight of all that wool on your back is about to sweep you away. The little spindly sheep legs are going to go from under you and you're off to your doom. You don't know how much you can hang on. But he will lead you by still waters. He may not still the waters completely. In fact, usually he doesn't. He doesn't. He allows the things to roar around you. But he will provide you with that safe area. He leads you by still waters. So now I don't know, I've got to know people here, of course. Jill and I have only been here a couple of months ourselves. But I don't really know all of your stories. It may be that you're beginning to wander away. Maybe, I don't know. Perhaps you might be going to church every week, week in, week out. But in your heart, you know that perhaps there are times when you just want to wander. I was in leadership when I went away from God. I was in leadership in our church in Jersey, and people used to look up to me. They say, "Good old Jeff." Even even after my wife left me, they said, I still carried on working in the church, and people used to say, they were so respectful of me because I kept soldiering on. Good old Jeff, his wife has left him. He's got 2 teenage girls to care for, and yet he carries on, still doing stuff for God. And yet in my heart, I was wandering away, further and further away from God. But even so, as I explained earlier, he called me back. I just want to make a declaration. It's never too late. It's never too late to come back. I'm a living example of that. So if you're feeling lost and lonely at any time, or if you're prone to wander in your heart, you might even be coming to church week in, week out, but you know your heart's not right. Or if you're in the middle of some sort of raging torrent where everything seems to be piling on you and you think you're going to be swept away at any moment, the Good Shepherd is right here. He's right here to calm the waters, and he's right here to bring you home. So be of good cheer. Amen. Thank you for listening.